Yo, class is Mr. Walsh. Yeah, I haven't shaved for a while, but I'm not coming in, I guess. So, anyways, quarantine can't keep me from you guys. So, let's talk some Great Depression. I know we've been talking Great Depression for a while, but let's get into the Dust Bowl and Hoover getting a bad rap. Shall we? Let's get started. In this Great Depression, problem is the Dust Bowl. Now, listen, the Dust Bowl stirs up earlier than some of the other problems because the agricultural problems actually started in the 1920s. But the laissez-faire governments at the time, felt that hey, it wasn't the government's place to bail out an industry or get involved in business. So, what does the Dust Bowl actually mean? The name given to the drought-stricken southern plains of the Midwest region of the United States, which suffered severe dust storms during a dry period in the 1930s. But let's go back farther. Rising prices of wheat in the 1910s and the 20s caused increased demand for wheat. And once again, think about it. I mean, there's a war going on. All right, so overproduction, right? The rising prices made farmers say, "Hey, listen, this is a cash crop. We're going to plant as much of it as possible." But when enough farmers have that same idea, it floods the market, and the price of wheat plummets. So, what do they do? They continue to tear up more grasslands, trying to plant more crops to have a bumper crop, that big crop that you get a lot of produce, you get a lot of yield, and you sell a lot and you make a lot of money. But here's the problem: a lot of times farmers will get loans to raise their crops, and then if their crops don't come in or they don't sell properly or don't sell for as much money, they can't pay back the loans. So this becomes an economic problem for them and the banks that gave them those crop loans. But also, what did they just do? They ripped up the natural grasslands to plant wheat. And planting them year after year after year, um, obviously is going to deplete the soil of the same type of nutrients. And then the drought comes. Uh-oh. The drought comes. A large amount of plowed up land that suffered from a drought caused eroding soil to become loose dust. Right? Dust then was swept up by these heavy, heavy winds. I mean, this area is also called Tornado Alley, right? And there's a lot of heavy winds that will sweep through there during certain times of the year. Now, if you have heavy tornado-like winds sweeping through and the soil is very, very loose, you got a problem. A very unique natural disaster that, the struggling agricultural industry created. Farms suffered extreme amounts of financial loss and bad health conditions from the extreme amounts of dust in the air. Black blizzards is what they called them, right? That was the phrase used to describe this giant wall of dirt that was heading towards you. We'll show a picture a little bit later. One storm in 1934 traveled 2,000 miles all the way to the Statue of Liberty. All right, so they could actually see, the remnants, the last pieces of dust storm in New York City, how heavy the one. It's kind of like, when you have these big tropical storms and then, we get a good rain. We weren't the island that had the actual tornado, but it was so heavy that it affected the weather where we are. Let's take a look at some of these pictures, right? Now, this isn't kids at the end of doing some chores. This is just what they normally looked like. They lived in filth, okay? This guy, check it out. He's trying to dig out his fence and reestablish his yard. He's got his, hole digger here. Kids are trying to help, and you know how it is when kids are trying to help. They help a little bit and kind of slow you down a lot. So, what else we got here? How about trying to go to school, right? Trying to go to school after a dust storm, there's still a lot of dirt just floating in the air, and people, would gag on it and so forth. So these kids are wearing masks to legitimately, and goggles, and hats to keep the dirt that is literally just floating around from a big dust storm. It could be picked up by a smaller wind from getting in their eyes and their hairs or breathing it, which obviously breathing enough dirt can cause problems, right? Now here it is. This is one of my favorite pictures. I mean, take a look. What do you do when you see something like that off in the distance, right? Try to outrun it? Could you imagine that thing catching up to you in a car? You might be a little bit safer just by staying at home. Because if it catches up to your car, it's probably picking your car up in the air. I mean, those are like, as I said, hurricane, tornado level winds. Look at these guys down here. They're watching it. I don't know whether they're game planning or what they're doing. I'm sure they could feel the wind. But, you know, this is a terrifying sight. Why is it a terrifying sight? Not only the damage does not only does the wind cause damage, but look at the aftermath. Look at the aftermath. This much dirt. Like, these are the top. Some of these wagons are completely covered. It looks halfway up the barn. It almost engulfed the car. It's like, you know, at the car's door level, steering wheel level. That's how much dirt. And it's not one pile. Look, it almost looks flat. So there is that much dirt, steering wheel height dirt, for miles, right? Completely covering your property. And how about the people that try to escape? Let's try to move to the city or a different part of the country. I mean, this is pretty much all they kind of owned. Put it on a little wagon type thing, pull it behind a car. And once again, this wasn't the era of, Sheetz and Wawas, rest stops and so forth. One more, the old famous picture of this lady, her children, and the little bit of the makeshift house that they have left. I don't know the story here. Did her house blow away, blow over? Was there that much damage? But, wow. This is the situation they lived in. Now, who was Herbert Hoover? Right, he was the 31st president of the United States. As I said, he has an incredible pre-presidential resume. Becomes popular for efforts during World War I, hunger relief. Isn't that irony? The irony of that is crazy. He became popular for hunger relief. He made sure people were fed during the war. Appointed to the head of the Food Administration by Woodrow Wilson. So that's, I mean, like his brilliance went across party lines. Democrat hired him. He's a Republican, right? Convinced businessmen to keep wages up, to keep people working. Gets elected. That's just part of his resume. He had an incredibly solid resume, but he held to conservative political philosophies of the time, which played a big role in the success of the Roaring '20s, but weren't exactly the medicine that was needed at the time. Felt that assisting should be handled at the local and volunteer level. Think about the progressive era, right? This is kind of directly after that. So it's like, hey, let's handle that at the local level. Let the volunteerism, charity churches, YMCAs, these new hall houses that are popping up, let these situations, let these administrations take care of it. It's not the federal government's job. Vetoed several bills that would have provided relief for struggling Americans. Prosperity cannot be restored by raids upon the public treasury. So it's like, hey, we can't just take public money and just throw it out there. And that's funny, I'm recording this as people's stimulus checks are showing up in the mail, right? Hoover lost virtually all support from Americans during the Depression. And even though the Depression was not his fault, he was blamed for it. Those shacks that you guys read about a few days ago that people put together with, look at their newspaper, little pieces of metal and shed, anything they could use to kind of put together a little shack. And this was not their property. This is Hooverville, public land. Homeless families would put together a shack on public land, and a lot of times the cities would not, cite them because they knew how bad the situation was. They called these things Hoovervilles, and newspapers were known as Hoover blankets. Wow. But literally, people were poor enough that newspapers, after you read them, it could block a little bit of the wind, right? A town built by unemployed people during the Depression. Poverty led to people resorting to live in these poverty stricken areas on somebody else's land.